Hello and welcome back to It's Not Just Black and White, where the topics we discuss will be controversial. As always, my name is Corey Bearclaw and I'm here with Jordan Brown and Ali Lake. Today we'll be talking about addiction, choice or no choice. Ali, do you believe addiction is caused by choice or an underlying disorder caused them to become addicted?
You know, that's a great question because in a lot of ways I believe that it's more of like a yin and yang situation or a balance situation when it comes to states of mind, right? If you are, leveled in your mind, that can either be sustained for a prolonged amount of time, but what I like to think is or what I've learned is that severe trauma, and especially at a younger age, right? Let's say from war would be the example of that. And this is, you could say child soldiers in Africa to the Vietnam War to all the way back to Verdun and the Somme, right?
Yeah.
When these soldiers come out, they're extremely traumatized and they may not even out of necessity have to develop an addiction to a substance that actually calms them down from these severe disorders. But you can't say that the soldier before he went to war was genetically predisposed to,
Yeah. So are you saying you believe that it is a choice, or you think that it's an underlying disorder?
I believe if the substance or your addiction has control over your life, then in a lot of ways you don't have a choice because your mind is not strong enough to overcome that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Jordan?
So honestly, I think addiction is a personal choice, and it might not be their fault, but it's something that they fall into. And so I believe there's underlying conditions that might make someone more prone to addiction than say the next guy.
Yeah, definitely. And actually in a book by Gene Hayman's Addiction, a Disorder of Choice, he had a developing argument where he points out that the best survey data available indicates that most drug addicts quit their addiction. But in fact, it's inconsistent with chronic disease models because you can't just go in and cancel your disease like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or things like that. Yeah. So it is in some ways definitely a choice, and I believe mainly that it is a choice because you're choosing to create behaviors that will lead you down a certain path to where you lose your ability to choose anything because you need to feed your addiction and keep on going with the process so that your body doesn't lack, the dopamine and things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I guess to clarify, I think everybody has an addiction problem. It's just some people have unhealthy addiction problems.
Yeah, it depends
right?
what they're addicted to.
Yeah, it depends. So, I mean, if you look at weed, for instance, right? This is a big polarized issue at this point. Big companies are getting involved. There's some people who say it's addictive, it's a gateway drug. Me personally, I do think it does have some addictive traits, but I don't believe that it is a gateway drug.
Yeah, but you see, I think this is where what we were speaking about before, this is where there's an additive effect of addictive personality, right? And that all depends on not only a person's biochemistry, but also how far and to which extent their mind has developed also, right? And I think this is kind of where the genetics plays a huge role, and I think alcoholism was something we wanted to focus on. Is that correct?
Yeah, when you think about alcohol and the ability, people develop disorders and are more prone to being addicted to alcohol if their parents have alcoholic issues. And you look back and you see that parents who have been drinking, kids have been around the parents who have been drinking. They feel that the best way to cope when they go into adolescence, into teens, they're like, hey, my parents started drinking, so I'm going to start drinking as well. And that kind of causes, more and more addictions later on because all they know is one solution. They don't know any other solution to it.
Yep.
Okay, sure. So can I ask you, is that a genetic thing or is that an environmental thing?
See, that's a great question that he asked because I have a story here. I mean, it's it seems like a myth now. It's a long told story, I guess. But in the case of alcoholism, right, I think that it goes both ways. I mean, you're also correct, Corey Bearclaw, but if we look at you know, there's a story about these twins. Their father was an alcoholic, right? Beat them. They had a terrible, like, traumatic experience childhood, but they both grew up in the same environment with the same experiences, right? But the end result was one of the twins ended up being an alcoholic, ultimately ended up being a failure. The other didn't become an alcoholic, ended up being successful, raised a healthy family, so on and so forth, right? So it goes both ways, wouldn't you agree?
I completely agree. And so to kind of answer your question, Jordan, whether it's genetic or environmental, it can actually depend. If the parents were addicted to alcohol before they had kids, then those kids then become more prone to the addictive trait because of, you know, their parents' behavior before that. So it can be genetic, it can be environmental.
Okay, so would you say, like, this is if the mother is, like, drinking when she's pregnant, or is it, or actually that leads me to a better question. Does the genetic come from the mother because she's the one who carries the child, or is it also from the father, if the father might have carried that addictive trait or whatever?
Yeah, well, when you're talking about genes, you know, you have half the genes from one parent, you have half the genes from the other.
It's always
and I'm definitely gonna say that if the mother's drinking while she's pregnant, that will definitely increase the chances of the addictive personality trait or being prone to addiction is higher for the child. But it can come from just the father or the mother at any given point.
I see.
And, you know, we're talking about addiction, and, you know, it's especially with pregnancy, you know, a lot of people stop drinking coffee, stop drinking, smoking cigarettes, stop doing drugs while they're pregnant. Do you guys believe that you have a choice to quit when you're addicted, or is there something blocking them from stopping? Meaning, like, if such things harm them, why would they continue to do such activities if it's bringing negative effects?
I mean, you know, it's not necessarily always negative effects, because you see in our modern society now, I would say, specifically women who are pregnant, right? It's totally, in some circles, completely acceptable for them to have a glass of wine every now and then, or take a couple puffs off a joint, you know, and that's accepted in our society, accepted as in our generation of who we are. And I personally don't see any problem with that, right? The only concern with the pregnancy is that when there's trauma or damage being caused to the fetus, right? Because then that's kind of irresponsible to, you know, to like a child who's not even yet been born, to introduce him to such substances would obviously lead to some sort of, you know, dysfunctional thing.
But I'm saying that, like, if you're addicted to meth, do you think there's a certain threshold that you meet that you can no longer just quit your addiction by yourself, and you need to go seek help, and like your choice of stopping is completely thrown out?
Yeah.
Or do you think that you will always have the choice to stop, no matter if from the first day that you try it to the last day that you ever had?
I think there's sorry to cut you off, JB.
No, go for it.
I think there's a point of no return. You know, when people lose their nature giving into a substance, right? So it's hard to become a normal person once you've been so detached from reality. What were you going to say, Jim?
I mean, I was going to say that I think it's always that person's choice, right? Because they have to choose to go get help. And then when they go get help, that doesn't mean that whoever is giving them help is going to do some magic spell.
Right.
And they're going to...
Right.
That's up to them, right?
Yeah.
They have to... grind through that and make that happen. The help is just a support system.
Yeah, and then when they leave that help or support system, they have to choose not to go back to the drugs. So I would have to agree with you, Jordan.
I mean,
on
relapse
that too.
is also part of the process, right? Like, everybody relapses.
Yeah. And when you know, to kind of touch back to your point about, you know, coffee and the mothers quitting and everything like that, Ali, like, if these addictions aren't necessarily harming them, for example, coffee, exercising, diet, can it really be called an addiction, or is it just an obsession?
Well, I would say that coffee has a more messed up effect, or drinking regularly coffee to pregnancy versus having one glass a month of wine, right?
Yeah.
I
but
think
does
that's
it, like, throw out the whole pregnancy thing? Just like, do you think that people, if it doesn't harm them, but they need to do something like drink coffee or exercise or need to follow a certain diet, can it become an addiction because if they don't follow it, maybe they start panicking, they have anxiety, withdrawals, or whatever?
See, at that point of no return, there's always a point where it's like you either become a functioning person who's an addict, or That point of no return is like you literally don't know who you are. Like you, for instance, a heroin addict, if you see them on heroin, you wouldn't recognize that person, right? So I don't wholly agree that it's simply genetic, but if I were to make a big claim, it's that all addiction stems from a point of internal insecurities, right? Addiction is indeed a disease, more so a mental health disorder, right? Itself. Now, we're not placing any judgment, obviously, on individuals with addictions, because at the end of the day, they are a part of our society, and albeit an outcast part, but in a lot of ways, it's the rest of society's responsibility to at least those that like can't afford to do something about it to help their fellow members of society, right? But this is like a larger, a play of a utopia that's unrealistic as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I kind of want to, I guess like segue off of this, because we're making a lot of suggestions or our opinions, right? But what do we really know about addiction, right? Like we're saying these things, we might have done our homework, but we haven't been faced with anything like this, right?
All right, well then, we can easily segue, easily talk about the most controversial topic of simulating addiction with it, and that's marijuana. Do either of you guys really believe that it is addictive, and what causes you to that conclusion then? And like, if you have any personal information, then let me know.
I mean, as I said earlier, I do think weed has its addictive properties, right? Mm-hmm. But also, like I said earlier, everybody has an addiction to something, whether it be weed, exercising, adrenaline, any of that, right? Do I think weed is a gateway drug? Absolutely not.
So you're saying marijuana it's more of a choice to continue the process, and there's no addictive behaviors that like can stem from it, because you see those people who are potheads who like they can't go to sleep when they smoke.
But I think what he's saying is they have like an addictive personality, right?
Yeah. Like what I'm saying is that's what they chose to be addicted to, almost, right?
But it's
or
not,
that's not even what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is it's so that's what they like to do on their spare time. That's their thing, right? But I say it's their choice if they want to have marijuana addiction escalate or turn into an addiction to other substances.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you are saying it's a gateway drug?
No, I'm saying it's a choice.
Okay.
I mean, like,
you can stop.
Have I smoked
marijuana,
weed
right?
before? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
did I end up doing other drugs because I smoked weed? Absolutely not.
Yeah. But so you're saying, to smoke weed, to not smoke weed, it's not addictive. You don't kind of develop anything from it.
No, I think weed is addictive. I'm just saying it doesn't lead to
other
drugs.
Yeah, but let's also make the distinction, right? You could be addicted to weed, or it's just so ingrained in your daily habits that you don't even notice, right? So it could be a habitual thing.
Yeah.
But I think what's also important is early age consumption, right? Corey Bearclaw pulled out some numbers that were really shocking in the sense that I think something with the 8th graders, I believe, so 8th graders, and then 1 in 6 people in high school, 12th grade, they smoke consistently on a daily basis, which is insane. I don't think that was the case a long time ago.
Yeah. The exact numbers were 3.1 million adolescents aged 12 to 17 used marijuana in the past year. 11.8 million young adults aged 18 to 25 used marijuana in the past year.
Yeah, you see, I think that on at an early age to an undeveloped brain, I think it definitely has some effects, right, that can lead to developed mental disorders. So I'll give the example. I used to know someone a long time ago, and this individual had schizophrenia, right? When he smoked weed for the first time, he literally said he saw the devil, having sex with a goat, okay? And I would say there was definitely, in his case, early trauma caused that, like, I don't want to say exactly what happened to him, but caused that schizophrenia in his mind, and by smoking one thing that's harmless to somebody else really gives him vivid, horrific hallucinations, right? But at the same time, and I have another friend, right, who consistently smokes. He's in meetings. He has a corporate job, very high functioning individual, right? And he works for a $10 billion company. He smokes weed and he closes $1 million deals, right? So it affects him not the same.
Yeah.
So I think individual body chemistry has a lot to do.
100%. But these numbers are alarming, right? As to how many young adults, kids even, are smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
Right? But the question that comes to me is, why? Why are they smoking marijuana? How are all these kids getting marijuana?
Because
I think
they're insecure. They need this something. That's
I don't
what
even
I'm
think
trying
it's
to
that.
say.
I think it's more of like a popular thing to do these days, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so mainstream. It's so out there. It's
Yeah,
almost
but-
like
It's
a
almost
cool
like
thing.
it's cigarettes of the 1960s
Exactly.
and 1930s.
Yeah, but like
Exactly.
all around the world, right? It's still, you can still be cool, quote unquote, and not smoke, right? And even here,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just you can be an athlete,
But
and
you
still
know,
be,
like at one point in time, that like it was cool to smoke cigarettes, and then it was cool to drink alcohol. Now it's cool to smoke weed.
Yeah, think
Yeah,
like
okay,
pop
that makes a
culture,
lot of
right?
sense.
I mean,
Yeah.
all these, these kids are into
Rappers.
Yeah.
pop stars or whatever. These Hollywood icons are ambassadors of these marijuana brands now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're invested in these companies.
it's literally an
Yeah,
ambassador.
and they're all
Yes.
young kids that are
They're
doing it,
looking up
and
to
so
them.
yeah,
And I think this is a direct correlation
Yeah.
to these numbers, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
know, like the interesting facts, like according to AmericanAddictionCenter.org, is that during adolescence, the brain is particularly sensitive to drug exposure, and marijuana use impacts how connections are formed within the brain. Other effects on the developing brain include interference with neurotransmitters and abnormal brain shape and structure volume. So, on top of them smoking when they're young, they're actually damaging the development of their brain.
Yeah.
And it can cause so many problems with everybody. And the crazy thing is that society is accepting this as the new norm, that
Yeah.
we should allow our kids to do this.
Yeah.
And they're making it more accessible with, you have vape pens, or what are they called? The pen.
E-cigarettes?
E-cigarette. The vape pens for weed.
They're just vape pens.
I don't know.
They're all the same.
I don't use,
It's
I
all-
don't know.
It's all the
Dab
same.
pens. Dab pens. There we
Dab
go.
pens.
There's the
Sure,
name of
yeah,
it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't
Same
know.
as a vape pen.
I've
Yeah.
never heard of it.
And like that's kind of perfect segue into the last and final question of weed and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Would you guys allow your kids to smoke pot when they've reached a specific age you decide is justified, given either your own personal experience with it or experiences you've seen with others?
That is a very tough question to answer, to
Really?
be honest with you. And I think I have to say no, right? That's just a responsible, answer. And I mean, I grew up with kids who smoked with their parents, right? And I mean, it almost seemed like an enviable relationship
Yeah,
because
sure.
Yeah.
you're hanging out with your kid on a different level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're just like kicking it, smoking,
Serious
whatever.
bond,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But, no, I couldn't.
Smoking with family is a different feeling.
So are you
Yeah.
gonna say that you finally understand where your parents were coming from when they didn't want you to smoke, but you thought you knew everything?
Yeah, definitely, like 100%.
What about you, Ali?
I commend you for asking a brilliant question. See, in my case, there's some things that need to be established, right? I don't want my kids to do bad things, but knowing my kids, I don't have kids yet, but knowing my kids, so knowing me tells me a lot about my kids, and I'm almost certain that they'll have that certain level of curiosity that's gonna get them into trouble sometimes in life. I mean, I can't blame them because they got it from me, and I'm almost certain that they're gonna want to try new things, and I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. I would just say that I'm there with them so they're safe, and I'll let them experience, not obviously at an appropriate age, but I'll let them experience anything that they want to experience, and then I'll allow them to see and decide what's good for them and what's not. But I know for a fact that if I'm strict with them and I restrict them on experiences and doing things, they're gonna go ahead and do that anyway. It doesn't go away,
yeah,
right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. And I have to agree with you. I think I wouldn't approve, but I don't want to have that adversarial relationship with my kids to the point where they feel like they have to hide something from
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and there's also like obviously there's going to be a level of discipline also, because I think that's one of the things that we all learned, which kept us on the right track for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And if we didn't get that discipline, or at least build that discipline, then
definitely.
we would be, I guess, rude people.
A
or
buddy I
something.
grew up with actually told me that when he was around 14 or 15 years old, his dad came up to him, said, "Hey, I know that you're going to high school. You're going to be tempted to do drugs, or you're going to be tempted to smoke pot. All I ask is that if you're going to do it with me first, so you get comfortable and know what it's like, and you're safe, and then you can go on and do it."
Yeah,
And
that's the healthiest
that
thing.
actually scared him
Yeah.
from wanting to do it, because he's like, okay, well, I don't want to break my dad's heart, but I do, but I do want to try this, but I don't feel comfortable doing it with Dad, so he kind of stayed away from it.
Yeah, I mean,
so
but
it's
it
kind
seems...
of it's a cool like reverse
And
psychology.
I would teach them that lesson, that hey, these things have their place. If you're going to indulge in these things, you keep them in that place. Don't ever let these substances control you, because it can be very easy, right? Yeah. And especially with this story, that's an incredibly healthy way to go about it, right? Like, I don't want to restrict them of anything, but I just want them to be good.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my head, honestly, is like, okay, it's one thing to like smoke a joint with your dad. It's a different thing to like do a line. With your dad,
Come on.
You know what I mean?
I'm Muslim, right? The first time I ever shared a beer with my dad I was like 22 years old. Corey Bearclaw was actually there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was also weird for me, because I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah.
And, it happens.
Yeah, but what about you, Corey? Like, would you?
Dude, to be completely honest, through all the studies I've seen, I've read, like, I even have a study here that found teens who regularly use marijuana lose on average 5.8 IQ points. I don't think I would want my kid to smoke weed. I've done it in my past. I wouldn't want it. I would tell them that I wouldn't want it, but I would be accepting to the fact that if they've done it, then like I might be mad, but I gotta accept the fact that they've done it.
Yeah,
it's gonna be
done,
everywhere.
yeah.
It's already done. I'm not gonna
It's
I'm
gonna
not
be at
going to ground them
7-Eleven
for
when they're
months
growing
and
up,
over.
dude.
Yeah, they're going to
Yeah.
experience things.
Yeah.
Like they're going to do what we did when we were kids. They're going to try
There's
something
going to be
new.
weed coffee
and
shops
that's
in their
fine.
lifetime, so it's
Yeah,
going to be the least of our
yeah.
concerns.
By the time that we have our kids at that age, we're going to be just like
Yeah.
It's gonna be so like
Yeah.
socially accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at that point, we'll need to worry about new age substances that could really,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
don't even know what those things look like yet.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
neurological
yeah.
drugs.
And actually, kind of talking about that, the new age drugs of right now. Switching topics to what can be considered harder drugs and in essence vastly more addictive. Examples: meth, heroin, cocaine. Why do you guys believe these drugs, when compared to cigarettes, alcohol, caffeine, and pills, have been shunned by society while the others have been more accepting?
You see, I think there's a distinction to be made. I don't think that these drugs are all shunned. And to ask the question why some of them are shunned, I think it's more of a societal question, right? What are the needs of that society, or what is built into the individuals in that society that they need to achieve? And then that substance of their choice allows them to, in their minds at least, achieve that goal. Now, I think that, for instance, cocaine in that form, heroin, these things are shunned because of the extent of debilitation that one person goes through when doing it, and people having seen that and experienced somebody and all these addictions of people going mad, I think that eventually drove those in the corner. But remember that yes, cocaine is, and methamphetamine is the shunned upon version, but if you look at amphetamine based pharmaceutical drugs, you can see it on your bottle, they're made out of amphetamine salt. Now amphetamine salt is that's another word for cocaine if I've ever heard it. Okay, so it sounds just like meth, right? So I don't know what this salt is because it's not literally salt. Okay, so
That's the same powder you sniff.
that is that distinction, And just to add on that, right? Since we're in the realm of society, I just wanted to plug in, prostitution, right? There's some countries where this is legal and technically morally and socially accepted, and some countries where it's not. Now, if we're looking at countries where it's legal, it becomes safer for both parties. the party that's purchasing the service and also the party that's serving up the service. There's regulatory processes, regulations, benefits, processes, healthcare, things that really create an era of safety and acceptance so that people are not doing this in some sort of illegal way. Now, if it's illegal in that society, it turns out being a black market for such services and incredibly unsafe for both parties, right? Even at the lowest levels, all the way at the highest levels, it's not that these things won't happen if you make them illegal. They're just going to still happen in a dark alley somewhere. Nobody knows about it. Somebody could get stabbed, robbed, killed. It doesn't even matter. And nobody would care because society's going to say, yeah, of course he deserved it. He was doing this bad thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, even at the lowest, highest levels, for instance, models, we learned this, they'll go to a shoot, quote unquote, and then end up being in a casting couch situation, right? I mean, Jordan Brown and I tried to solve this problem a while back, and we actually have a secondhand experience, but a live experience on like how at the lowest level things could even get bad, right? Jordan Brown, you want to share what we learned in that process?
Yeah, you know, like what Ollie said, our experience, it was a secondhand experience, but nevertheless, it was a real experience. And this was a young woman who is a model now, a successful model now at that.
Yeah.
She, in her early days, before she had an agency trying to get started, we learned about the whole industry, but how it works is in the beginning, you kind of are just trying to get content. You're trying to get your name out there. You're looking for gigs or whatever. She goes to, you know, she thinks she finds someone who's credible, goes to a gig, gets in the place, and it is
it's like a weird.
Not what she
it's a
expected.
weird, not
like
what
a-
she expected, uncomfortable, you know, situation.
And that shouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
To
So, sorry to cut you off, but
fine.
you know, kind of tying that back. So, are you saying that by legalizing it, and it creates the process of cleaning up those that otherwise harmful drugs
Through policy
and
and
through
regulation.
policy, politics, FDA, well,
Exactly.
So on and so forth,
Yeah,
it makes the drug not necessarily as harmful, and so it's accepted because it doesn't destroy you as bad as coke and meth does
Exactly.
right now.
So I'll reinstate my point of this basically. So in our society, right? Let's just take America, and we live in California, so we live in nice America. Designated areas for smoking, designated buildings for coffee, designated buildings for alcohol, designated drive-through buildings for pharmaceuticals. My point is this, dude. When there isn't a designated section for the things frowned upon by society, it doesn't mean that those things will no longer exist in society, right?
They
Still
don't just
gonna
go
happen.
away.
They'll happen sneakier and under much more dangerous circumstance, and that is literally costing human life. And I don't know what kind of world we live in where we see the cost of human life as so freaking expendable. I refuse to accept that. Right?
Yeah.
And we can be a better society by doing shit that's good for everybody.
And we've worked so hard to like develop these things to value human life, right? We have all these laws and things to protect. And before these laws were in place, again, it was like lawlessness.
Yeah.
Human life didn't matter. If someone
It's a great
did something
point.
that felt like to wrong you, you could just like cut them down in the street.
So, I'm just trying to, grasp your guys' point. Are you guys saying or suggesting that it's possible that if we were to legalize all these drugs, like Oregon's doing right now, that we might see a reduction either in addiction or the harmfulness of these drugs since they'll have more access to it? Or what, where exactly are you trying to go with this point?
I think people will still be addicted, to shit, okay? People want stuff, they like the feelings of dopamine when they get that stuff.
Yeah.
My point is only specifically on the topic of prostitution because that connects to sex addiction and so on and so forth, right? But legal prostitution in the form of whether it's addiction or not, I'm just talking about as a general topic, legal prostitution is actually a healthy thing for society and is a marker of a healthy society, not the opposite.
Okay.
It doesn't say that they're degenerate. It says that they care about technically the lowest strata of people who have to conduct that service to feed their children.
Yeah.
But no. So to answer your question, no, I don't think that they should make every drug legal or whatever.
I don't think that either.
But I think the solution can be more constructive than sending people to jail or shunning them,
or
making it such a taboo that it needs to be done in the dark corners of society,
barring them from society.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you think about alcohol and the damage it's done to families as well, why do you guys think that alcohol and the addictiveness that can come from it, the little dependency on it that people need, that they, after drinking for years on end, they literally need to drink alcohol to continue to survive, or they will die either of seizures or a heart attack?
Yeah.
Do you think that we should continue to have alcohol with the damaging factors, whether it be external, internal? Alcohol, like it's torn families apart while being legalized, and it's shown the same effects that on families as any other drug addiction. Like 1 in 5 children grow up in a home where a parent abuses drugs or alcohol.
Wow.
So why alcohol? Why do you guys think that alcohol should be legalized?
I mean, I'll give you the example. I know for a fact that alcohol is also one of these drugs that if you quit cold turkey, your heart literally explodes, right? With heroin, you don't necessarily die. If you go cold turkey, you're sick as heck afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But alcohol, you stop it, your heart ruptures. It can't handle it from a severe alcohol. Like, I'll give you my example. When I was in Switzerland, I drank in 4 months. I drank more than I've drank in my entire life, right? Grew up as a Muslim. Alcohol wasn't a big deal for me. But every time I drank, whether it was a little bit, whether I got too drunk or a little bit drunk, there was like this guilt conscious, on my head always, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I don't really drink today. But in Switzerland, those 4 months, I was drinking like someone who's trying to build a alcohol addiction. And now, like, I guess it didn't work out because I really tried to get addicted to alcohol, but I hate it now. I can't stand it. I can't. I don't like the smell,
Yeah, so you kind of had like a reverse effect of you drank so much alcohol that you got sick of it and never wanted to go back to it.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that, in my opinion, so alcohol is a comfort drug, right? It's a social drug. I believe you were in Switzerland, and I mean, I wasn't there with you, but we sure talked a lot.
The stories.
But so you're in the European setting, everybody else is drinking. It's a socially fun thing to do. When I enjoy like a nice glass of wine, maybe a little cup of whiskey here and there, but I like it especially when I'm having a good time with you guys. If we're celebrating or there's an occasion. But it's people who use alcohol as a release or as an escape is where it gets unhealthy.
Great point.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean as to addiction is that personal choice. It's because people use it to get away from whatever it is they're running away from.
Yeah, because then you even have the common phrase of everything good as long as it's not in excess.
Yes. Facts.
So if you're choosing to excess it or use it in excess, that's when it becomes damaging.
Yeah. And so on this point, we were just talking about society came into play again. Another addiction that I've seen, I think it's not only a socially accepted addiction, but it's how society is. It's a part of it, and it's a form of addiction. So we talked about intrinsic aspects of addiction, and then we highlighted an individual's need to be a part of society or something bigger than themselves, or a need to fit in, right? So my argument is that society not only condones these addictions, but it's actually set up to induce this, systematic thing, this system.
Yeah.
So the example I have is that we know that people will buy clothes, cars, houses that they can't afford, and then put it up on social media or whatever, and they do it so their communities see them in a certain light, right? And I would argue that this too is an unhealthy form of addiction, and it's a great example of how, although addiction stems from an internal source, your need to fit in, it can be heavily influenced and induced by an external source. In this case, it would be society.
Yeah. And in some terms, what you're saying, I completely agree with it. It can come from internal, external, and all those different things. But sometimes when I think about external kind of events that are causing addictions, what about when you're looking at prescription drugs, like Xanax or Adderall? Why are these becoming acceptable forms of consumption while the equivalent illicit drugs like heroin and meth are shunned. When we just look at the comparison of Adderall and meth, they're literally the similarities. There are a bunch of similarities, but a lot of differences. For example, Adderall works as a stimulant, increases attention, focus, alertness, and everything like that. But it's meant for kids with ADHD. And the only differences between the active ingredient in Adderall and the active ingredient in meth is literally just a single methyl structure.
Yeah.
But that difference, according to actually the National Institute of Drug Abuse, makes methamphetamine much more powerful than the regular amphetamine that you'd see in Adderall. And also along with that actual added methyl structure onto it, it actually has a lot more harmful side effects.
I just thought of something that may be an answer for why these things are shunned and why not, right? If you notice, not necessarily the process of making cocaine or like that completed substance, you can't have a patent on it.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was
That
thinking.
is so crazy.
One
right?
is a profitized machine
Yeah.
that is in the books as we are okay to give you things like this, addict you on things, versus the small guy who's making meth in his RV somewhere.
And I have a story on that later, but to address what Corey Berklaw is asking, right? I put down this statement. I think it's funny because there's a lot of truth in it because these two things have happened and currently exist as a thing. So my claim is that the doctor in Broward County that microdoses regulated, let's say Adderall or MDMA to stay sharp and save more lives, and the engineer in Silicon Valley that microdoses LSD or psilocybin mushrooms to regulate their mood and efficiency, I think overall and ultimately it's a good thing for society.
And like when we're actually talking about, it's not a profit machine, like you don't have big pharma profiting from it. Here's another another addiction that you could say that's not necessarily has any health effects on physical well-being, but there is people profiting from it. And it actually has damaging effects on one's mental well-being. The one and only social media.
Woo!
This, I have kind of a three-pronged question for you guys. First off, do you guys believe that social media is addicting and is now ruining the new generation?
Yeah.
Also, do you think that the people are making the conscious choice to be addicted, or does it stem from a neurological decision-making pattern that was triggered by these algorithms written by these massive social media companies?
So let's go step by step. Can you break down your first prong, please?
Yes, to reiterate that first question. Do you guys believe that social media is addicting and is now ruining the new generation?
Yes, I do.
All right, and what makes you think that?
Well, I'm going to attempt to answer all three prongs of your question.
All right. I love to hear it.
He's
Give him a round of applause.
He's a champion.
So, yes, I think that social media is addictive, and I do think it is ruining the generation. Well, I shouldn't say that it's ruining this new generation, because I really don't know. Maybe I'm just not into the flow of things as everybody else. It's its own way of communication and expression that I just haven't gotten that into. But I gotta say, it does got me a little bit addicted, right? I mean, I catch myself at times headed straight to Instagram. But I do think that these algorithms are designed to make us addicted.
Yeah.
They're playing right into the human nature, feeding into that back corner of your brain.
Fabric of our lives.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's perfected understanding the human.
Yeah.
And then these social media companies are arguably the modern day version of big tobacco back in the 50s or the 60s, right?
Yeah.
But they're much, much more powerful.
Let me say this, just to add on to that, because that's a great point. I do believe they're more powerful because what these companies have that tobacco didn't have in the beginning is data tracking, right? Data analytics. So the movie is Netflix, The Social Dilemma, right? It's about Facebook and whatnot.
Yeah.
Now, the gist of that movie is this, that all the searches that you have on Facebook, YouTube, Google, whatever you said, that's all collected in a data bank, right? And in terms of this AI or the computer or the person that's looking at it, that basically creates a category or a box or a profile of you.
Yeah.
Now, you may think that you're the most unique person in the world, but you're actually more likely there's several hundred and thousands, millions of people who you also fall in that category. Now, what these companies do is they'll place an ad for people who come from this profile. They'll place an ad of purchases that most likely these guys are going to make. Now, when you're prompted that ad and that ad is in front of you, you're thinking, yeah, of course I would buy that. You click the ad, you buy it, and you think you made that decision all by yourself, but really you were prompted to. At the end of the day, that data was collected and you're basically just a lab rat in your own home.
Yeah. You can almost say it's correlated to neuro-linguistic programming in some ways as well.
Yep.
Because it's literally just trying to tie you into some behavior that is committing you to a decision
100.
that you thought you made on your own, but it was made by someone else.
Yeah, it shapes your ideology.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And
That's the money. That's where the money is.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think. So another great Netflix, documentary, if you guys haven't seen it, it's called The Great Hack. And it shows how they can use like social media and your preferences and what you search in order to influence more of what you think, and that in turn can influence the outcome of an election.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
See?
Check that one out.
Wow.
Yeah. And you know, they even say that social media is contributed to it, like the addiction of it. It's contributed to dopamine-inducing social events. Like it's literally the likes you get, the pictures you see, the
all about
videos
the
you
likes.
see. It's all personalized to you, and so much dopamine is just rushing through your brain at once.
Yeah.
It's almost like what you're getting is kind of like that same experience when you're gambling or even using recreational drugs, because you just get all of this pleasure when comfort.
Well, actually, so that leads me to a quick thought, as in, is it like ruining this new generation or even having impacts on our generation? And I believe it's acceptance. It's a way of acceptance, right? People need this acceptance and they're not getting it in real life anymore because of social media and maybe like COVID these days. And so they looked for the likes and the follows to get that.
And so I agree with you. I think you're right, of course, but I also think, again, as we always try to do, is that there's another side to that as well, a very positive side. And I'll tell you, there's an individual that I got to know, and this was from, you guys know I was involved with a digital marketing company, so on and so forth. And this is somebody that I reached out to in efforts to help him out with his business. It ended up being he has phenomenal energy. We clicked. He's a friend of mine. He lives in Florida. This individual, he is older than us, of course, but I look up to him. Dude, he was in a plane crash. Okay, he was the only survivor.
What the?
Wow.
I've never met him in person. He was the only survivor, and the doctors told him you won't ever walk again. He's a personal trainer to the rich. He literally is the most athletic person that I know.
Yeah.
But again, I've never met him, and he's a very good friend of mine. We share like an emotional connection, and I've never met him in person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That is the power of social media.
It's crazy. Look at
There
that.
is some good things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's been able to like connect the world
Who
to
knew?
a point. Everybody can see what's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
But that leads to like governments who are trying to, more authoritarian ones, trying to like censor it, right? But also these social media companies, as I said, they're much more powerful, to the point where they even silenced a sitting president, now ex-president.
Yeah.
And that is,
Which should be
shocking.
freaking unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I completely agree, but I do not want to get off topic with our topic
You're
of
right, thank
addiction
you.
today, because that can
Yeah.
be ranting and ranting. We could talk about that all day long.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
But you know what I love? You guys start bringing up topics about big pharma, government, and social media. That they're kind of correlated in some ways. And I think talking about these social media giants creating addicts to their platforms is a perfect segue into the topic of big pharma and government policies. So we see how big pharma has played a huge role in addiction in the past, being one of the leading causes of opioid addiction. Don't you think it's interesting how companies can provide you with a product that will cause you to become addicted to it?
Yeah, that's a great setup, Corey. I appreciate that. That actually brings us to the point of big pharma, and let me tell you, I got a few things to say. So let's just talk about the sheer size and political power and influence over policy, right? And I want you to keep in mind through this story that when you talk about big pharma, it's global players. It's always global players. And since now we are a globalized world, one thing in one edge of the world affects the other, right? So,
Yeah.
And these companies, as Corey's saying, right, they've technically prospered and generated copious amounts of money by keeping the public sick, right? Let's not even talk about the FDA influence just yet, but if they cure you of the sickness that you have a prescribed subscription for, you won't need them anymore, would you? And that statement is kind of leading to an era of dependency on these big pharma companies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, remember that always global. Keep that in mind, right? So, most likely if a drug is manufactured, it's manufactured in India and or China, but it's terms of low cost, at the lowest possible cost. Now, most likely it's taken by, marketed to, and sold to Americans as a non-generic or a prescribed version of a very specific drug. Now, non-generic basically means that it has a patent, right? That patent is needed to keep up with regulations in the U.S. so that they can sell and market and, make that money.
Yep.
We know patents go up like 20 years, let's say. Now, once that patent is out, it becomes a generic or over-the-counter drug in very technical terms.
Yeah.
But it cannot be sold in the U.S. in the same manner because it can't be considered up to our standard. And this is something like a practice that's been going on as far back as pharmaceutical goes, like snake oil salesmen and whatnot. But so now I'm going to assume the voice of a guy who's in charge of this big pharma company, right? So let's say, but wait, my company still has millions of dollars of inventory. What am I going to do? Declare that a sunk cost? Absolutely freaking not. What I'm going to do is have my R&D bros slightly change the formula so we can then rebrand, remarket, repatent, and sell more drugs and make more money. But wait a second, I still have that last inventory. Again, I'm not just going to let that cost go.
Yeah.
I'm a businessman. I need to generate revenue for my company, otherwise I'm gone.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do about that is I'm going to dump these quote-unquote used products into third world markets in Africa and South Asia, where there are hardly any regulations, hardly any rule of law, and if someone is going to sue you for, some sort of sickness that they got, well, let's just say you're not going to get sued, all right?
Yeah.
Now,
it's going to be a lot harder.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Now, what that is kind of indicative of is a corrupt system, right? Last week we talked about inequality, and this was something that came up, right? That these systems of society that were created to instill order, they end up being mechanisms that create periods of disorder and which they can then consolidate their power through that chaos, right? And we were talking about policing and the war on drugs. And then we had like a few points on that. So JB, you want to hit us?
Yeah, well, I would call it the failed war on drugs, right? That feed into this power cycle. And this power cycle, if you guys tuned in to last week, you should be kind of familiar with this cycle. And it's a way to keep the flow of money moving. And as we mentioned, the war on drugs was a way to shape ideology, in fact. It created the ideology to make people scared of drugs and think that they were a negative impact on society. But really, it could be arguably a war on free thought. And this war on free thought turned America into the most incarcerated country in the world. And more specifically, it generated the need for these for-profit prisons. Prime example, there's people who are making money by sending people to jail. And this leads us to that vicious power cycle of what Noam Chomsky mentioned, to where these for-profit prisons or even big pharma influenced legislators to create policy that leads to more incarceration, which then leads more money into their pockets, which then repeats itself.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
powerful.
Yeah, exactly. So you bring up a phenomenal point, because this is indicative of Chomsky's principles of concentrated wealth and power. Like, if you guys recall the graph that I was describing to you guys last week, right? So let's say Big Pharma is on the right, on the left side, right? And Big Pharma is where that concentrated wealth is. Now, as the chart, as an arrow goes from one side, which is wealth, to the other side, the cost of elections goes up, right? And that then solidifies or isolates political power for these big pharmaceutical companies. That power is translated into influence over policy, and that translates through legislation and, let's say, administrative force to then be redirected back into concentrated wealth. And I have an example. So back in the day, let's say when cigarettes were being popular and there was money to be made in cigarettes, and also in the example of asbestos in the walls and so on and so forth, right? The CDC at that time, they were saying that cigarettes don't cause cancer and asbestos doesn't cause emphysema and like other forms of lung disease. And today they say the opposite. But they said one thing during that time because profits could be made and it was necessary at that time. And right, that's where it ties into the political corruption. It's sort of a situation where it's easier to ask for forgiveness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow, Ollie, that was a great point, and I think this is a perfect time to close out. Thank you guys for making it to the end and listening to everything we said. Drop a comment below, smash that like button, and tell us what you think. As always, my name's Corey Bearclaw. I'm joined with Jordan Brown and Ali Laik. I'll see you guys next week. We got something special for you.